Hi, and welcome to the Humans of the Northern Beaches We Belong podcast, the show that gives a voice to a diverse range of community members here on the Northern Beaches in Sydney, Australia.
We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are recording this podcast and show our respect to the elders past and present and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening in.
This podcast is proudly funded by the New South Wales Government through the New South Wales Social Cohesion Grants for Local Government. All views and opinions expressed by participants in this podcast belong to the participants and do not reflect the views of Northern Beaches Council.
This episode discusses sensitive topics such as physical trauma, depression, and suicide. Listener discretion is advised. Please take care of yourself, and if you need to, reach out for help. You can find more information in the show notes. Hi everyone, my name's Margaret, and in today's episode we'll be chatting with Simon. Simon is a Northern Beaches resident and a very active community member who has called the peninsula home for a number of years. Life changed for Simon at the age of 15 when he was run over by a train, losing his left arm. Today we'll talk about how he navigated his recovery, built a successful career in radio, and how he came to be involved in the community. Hi Simon, thanks so much for joining us and opening up to our listeners. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks for the introduction. That's very kind. In fact, if I could have heard that on the 27th of May 1996 in Royal North Shore, it might have given me a bit of positivity to go forward with. So no, that was a nice intro. Thanks very much.
Pleasure. Welcome. So we're going to start with some quick fire questions to get to know you a little bit. Some of them are Northern Beaches based, but it will just help our listeners to understand a bit about who you are. So, first question: Manly or Palm Beach?
Manly.
Beach or bush?
It's a tough one because I was born in the bush, but I do love the beach now. That is a tough one. At this point in time, I think I'd have to say beach. I think I would, yeah.
What about the beeline or the ferry?
Ferry.
Yeah,
no brainer.
It's the best public transport in the world, I think.
Oh, and Sydney Harbour's the best harbour in the world. How good is that, the trip across the harbour to Circular Quay?
Early bird or night owl?
I was always a night owl when I was younger, but these days I'm an early bird, and it's the best transition in a lifestyle choice I've made, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, the beach walk as the sun's coming up from DY up to Longreef.
Yeah.
Beautiful. You can't beat it.
You can't beat it.
If you get down there before the sun comes up.
And it's free.
I know. That's crazy, isn't it? It's just the best way to start the day.
Yeah. Emu or kangaroo?
Kangaroo, I guess, if I was to choose which one was my favourite. I'll go aroo.
What's one thing you can't live without?
Music.
Yep. Any particular genre?
Oh, when I was younger, I loved my rock and my heavy metal and all that sort of stuff. As I've gotten older, I've sort of moved more into classical, opera, musicals, that sort of stuff. Bit more of a refined taste. I think that's coming through from my father's influence. So I've got a playlist every morning. I do my yoga stretches and I put a classical playlist on, and it just gets me into a good headspace.
Nice. Sounds like you've got good mornings. Favourite coffee shop on the Northern Beaches?
I go to Twist. That's an easy one. Twist on Howard Avenue in DY.
Yep.
Best coffee on the beaches.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're a good team down there. I've been going there for years. And I've started to break into a friendship group down there. Well, it took me about 5 years, and I'd see the same people every morning. We'd say hello, and then finally I sat on their table one day, I think because it was busy and there was nowhere else to go, and we sit on the same table every morning and have done ever since. And we've got our little group and we chat about what we got for the day ahead and just trivial day-to-day matters or what's making the news. And it's a really good little connection group to, again, that morning routine, getting your day right. I've got a really good gang down there. I love it. Every morning I try and get down to Twist in DY.
What's your favourite way to relax after a long day?
Probably listening to a good podcast, to be honest with you. I'm not just saying that because we're doing a podcast, but I do enjoy kicking back and putting a good podcast on. Listening to the true crime ones or, true stories. I love them.
How long have you lived on the Northern Beaches?
10 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I moved here it was the end of October 2014, and I moved across for work, which we'll get into soon.
Yep.
And I can honestly say, with a podcast themed, belonging to the community, for the first 9.5 of those 10 years, I simply lived in the community on the Northern Beaches. But for the last 6 months, I've actively participated in the community on the Northern Beaches. And I wished I had done it sooner. I really wished I had done it sooner.
Okay.
And it's funny how in 6 months I brought all this into the space. For 9.5 years, I didn't really know anyone. So you can lock yourself away and not be a part of life, or you can get involved. And it's amazing how quickly things can improve for you when you just say yes to things and get involved.
Yeah. We have one more quick fire question, which is, what is the thing people often misunderstand about you?
I made a bit of a joke with you before off air about how people can sometimes misread my sense of humour. Look, I've got a bit of a dark sense of humour, and honestly, it's what gets me through my life from everything I've been through. And not everyone is quite on the same wavelength as you. They might take me. Some people take me far too literally. Yeah, people, you don't have to take everything I say literally.
Yeah.
So I guess I've just got to read the room. I've got to choose my audience. I know I'm safe with you, but I think some people misread my sense of humour, and I'm not being serious. I'm just trying to crack a joke because I always say I like to have at least 5 belly chuckles a day. So I try
That's a good prescription.
I try to find the humour in things, and just try and be amused by things, because smiling and laughter's the best medicine. It really is. It's what everyone needs to do, and sometimes we forget to laugh, and it's something that's very important for good mental health.
Yeah, that's great advice. So you mentioned you moved to the Northern Beaches about 10 years ago. Where was it that you grew up?
I was born over in Perth in 1980, a little place called Les Murdy, which is up in the bush. It's up in the hills outside of Perth. And it was a good kid's life, We rode bikes around the bush, went fishing for yabbies in the creek, played backyard cricket. Our dog ran around everywhere with it. It was your classic 80s Aussie, kid's life. Didn't have a pool. We ran around under the sprinkler, that kind of thing, And it was good. And then my dad, he was a teacher at the time in Perth. He was a boarding house master at a school called Guildford Grammar. He wound up getting a job as the deputy headmaster to the junior school at Barker College in Hornsby, here in Sydney. So we moved across 1987. I was 7.5, and then started going to Hornsby South first. It was the primary school. And then when I got to year 3, I went to Barker, and Dad was the teacher there. He was deputy for a few years, and then wound up becoming the headmaster, which he held for nearly 30 years.
Oh, wow.
So we were always living in school accommodation. In fact, we lived in the school on the grounds of Barker College for 4 years.
Yeah.
In the junior school. We lived above the library. That's right. We're in a library recording right now. And my bedroom was above a library at Barker. Yeah, it was, they were fun years. It was a tough time as well, because something that you wouldn't have known about me is that I lost my mother through that period. She was 37. And she died of a brain tumour, and she got sick. And when we were living at the school, and went to hospital here and was at the Sand for treatment and having surgeries. But
wow, that must have been a huge transition, not just from moving interstate, but you're having a new family dynamic, I suppose.
Yeah, it was. I mean, looking back, the school were like the support team around us. They were fantastic. All of the families and the teachers and the kids, they all rallied around us. They were very supportive. But sadly, we lost Mum at the end of 1990, and then came back. We took her over to Perth because we're from there, so that was where the funeral was, and that was where we caught up with all the family and friends and said goodbye. And then we came back to Sydney, back to Barker at the start of 91, and it wasn't long after that until my dad then got the job as the head. And it was just my brother, who's older than me, my sister, who's younger, myself, and my dad, and it was the family of 4.
Yeah.
That was it. That's been our dynamic ever since.
Yeah.
So we were in the school flat there until they kicked us out and turned it into a staff room. My old bedroom became Mr. McLaren's office.
There you go. So you stayed at Barker until the end of your schooling?
No, I was there until year 10, and then that was when the accident happened, which we're about to go into now.
Yeah.
And there'll probably be people who listen to your podcast here that remember that period, that might be connected to the school.
Yeah,
brothers
for sure.
that went to the school. I remember that.
Know your dad.
There would be a lot of people that do.
Yeah.
People listening might remember it. I remember that in 1996.
Yeah.
And I was year 10. I'd actually just started at Turramurra High.
Okay.
So I'd left Barker at year 10. I was given a tap on the shoulder and asked not to come back. There was a list of things over the years. I won't go into it. But I got up to a bit of mischief, I was always a bit of a... But other teachers used to say...
That dark sense of humour.
Yeah, well, the other teachers used to say it's because your dad's the headmaster. You feel like you've naturally got to rebel against authority, I don't know, maybe there's something in that my brother, there's nothing wrong with him or my sister, so I don't know. But anyway, I was going to Turramurra.
Yeah.
And then, the 27th of May 1996 was when everything changed for me.
When life changed. So, you shared with us that you were involved in a train accident.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was just to sort of set the scene for listeners, because people think, how on earth did that happen?
Yeah.
It was a Saturday night. we'd had a group of kids that were in Warunga Park. A few of us have been drinking. I've been drinking heavily. Alcohol was a big part of it. That's a lot of what we used to do back then on weekends. And I have no recollection of what happened. And there was no cameras on the station back then, on the smaller stations. And no one seemed to remember anything. Certainly no one said they saw anything. And the next thing I know, the next memory I have was waking up in a hospital bed in Royal North Shore Hospital, and there was a nurse sitting beside me saying, "Do you know where you are? Do you know your name?" And so I'm nodding at that. And she says, "You've just had a terrible accident. You've been hit by a train and you've lost your arm. You've lost your left arm. You've lost your right hand."
Wow.
Yeah. And yeah, I thought, okay, right, eh? And I'd sort of came to a few times and drifted off and came to, and then I realised it wasn't a dream or a nightmare, and
so
it was real.
How long after the accident was it that you woke up?
Oh, I think it was about a week.
Yeah.
I think it was, yeah. I think I
Wow.
was in a coma for that long. Look, I'm not 100%. But then from that moment when I woke up, it was then a few days later that I woke up again. And I was in a room with bright lights, a lot more hospital staff. And my dad was at the foot of the bed. And the chaplain from Barker, Reverend Jeff Ware, he was at the foot of the bed too. And that's when I thought, this is serious if Reverend Ware's turned up. God almighty, he's about to read me my last rites. I realised then, I thought, you've done it this time, Harrison. You've got the Reverend here. And they were just looking at me with a big smile on their face, sort of as if to say, it'll be okay. But deep down, they were thinking, and certainly my dad would have been thinking, good God, what sort of a future is he going to have?
Yeah, and he had a week to come to terms with it.
Oh, yeah.
It must have been such a shock for you.
Yeah, well, for me, in many ways, it's probably wrong to use the word fortunate, but I was luckier than my father in the sense that I was medicated. I was so heavily medicated, very strong sedatives, very strong painkillers. I remember they put me on the laughing gas every time they change a bandage, and I used to look forward to bandage changes actually, because you're on the laughing gas. It was amazing stuff. God, where's this stuff been all my life? So in many ways, I was sort of in a bit of a bubble wrap,
Yeah.
But for others that were stone straight and sober to it all, very tough, for my dad. In fact, I remember when they took the bandage off my hand, because when I mentioned before I lost my right hand, it was the first operation in Australia where a hand surgeon had performed a hand transplant. And they'd take my fingers from my left hand and grafted it onto my right. So I've got the original thumb on the right, but the fingers and the rest of the hand is from my left hand. So I've had no feeling in it.
Yeah.
But they did that to try and give me a chance, it was that or nothing.
Yeah.
So I'm glad they went to the effort to do it, because I wouldn't have had the life I've had and been able to live independently had they not gone to that effort. And it was an initial 15-hour operation with very intense microsurgery and additional operations after that, and none of which my family paid for, I should add.
Yeah.
It was all sort of covered through the public hospital system or whatever. It was a kid who needed help and they all stepped in. And
Wow.
I remember my dad came to me years later. He said, "I've always wondered if the phone's going to ring one day or a bill's going to turn up." He said, "They haven't charged me a red cent."
Yeah.
People pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for this stuff.
Yeah.
So in that regard, I was very fortunate that we never paid for it.
It sounds like you're very good at seeing the silver linings in
Yeah,
situations.
I haven't always been.
Yeah.
I haven't always been. Maybe that's an indication of how I'm talking now about where I'm at in my life.
Yeah.
But certainly when I was younger, I was very much a glass is half empty kind of guy.
So, when the accident occurred, you were 15 years old, which is a hard enough time for anyone. And how did you navigate, trying to be a person and growing up when you had this huge adjustment to deal with?
Well, the thing was I went into denial.
Yeah.
So I didn't address it. And that was what caused me so many problems later in life. It's what I'll tell younger people now that would be going through a similar thing.
Yeah.
Is you've got to meet it head on as soon as you can. Because for every year you go by where you don't, you're putting another slab of concrete over it. And at some point in the future, you're going to have to work through all that concrete to get down to where you are,
Were the people around you also in denial?
Yeah,
Okay.
they were. We really didn't know what to do. My friends we just all carried on like nothing had happened. And I think a lot of that came down to the fact that we just didn't have the therapy and the knowledge and the know-how and the counselling that we have now back then, 30 years ago. Absolutely, it was the wrong way to go about it, because what I needed was to get straight into therapy straight away. I needed to be talking to people about it and not just sort of pretending it hadn't happened, but I just went into my own sort of cocoon, just smoked a lot of weed and just sort of pretended like it hadn't happened, and I just zoned out.
Yeah.
I zoned out of life, and I didn't really feel like I had a future, and I was happy just to sort of, live day to day in my little cloud of purple haze.
Yeah.
And really not think too far ahead. But if I could go back and talk to my younger self now, I'd say, you need to be addressing this a lot sooner.
Yeah.
Because it hasn't helped me later in life.
Yeah.
You've cost me a lot of time later in life, pal. Now put that bong down and bloody well see a psychologist. That's what I'd say to
But I
myself.
suppose you didn't have the opportunity for those sorts of things, and
No.
it doesn't sound like the people around you would have necessarily known to encourage you.
No,
that way either.
I feel sorry for my poor old daddy, because he'd lost his wife, you got to remember, only 6
Yeah,
years earlier,
yeah.
so he's going through that. And then his son gets hit by a train and loses an arm. I've always said that there's one person in this world who has suffered more than me as a result of what happened to me, and that was my father.
Yeah.
That is my father, yeah. So he's the one I really feel for.
Yeah.
And really, with my brother and sister, we haven't really been a supportive sort of family. There's no bad blood between us. We're civil and we get on and we talk and we got good relationships, but we're just not close.
Yeah.
Like other families are.
Yeah.
And I've seen other family dynamics where they're right there for each other and they're calling each other and supportive. And I envy that.
Yeah.
I think I wish I had that. I wish I had that. I mean, I've even seen some people who have been friends with me, and I've said to them, "You're the sister or the brother I should have had."
Yeah.
You really,
Yeah.
because I tend to think with proper support, it could have gotten me to a better place sooner.
So what was it like when the day that you left the hospital?
That was after 4 months.
Okay.
In fact, I had my 16th birthday in there.
So you missed quite a bit of school as
I
well.
did, half a year 10. I remember I missed the following year too. I would have been in year 11, but I had a gap year, as they say. I had the whole year off. So that was when I did just, drop into my little bubble, and I was smoking a lot, listening to music, not doing anything, not progressing, and my friends are all at school going on with their lives, getting their first jobs, they're getting their P's and driving cars and, getting into their relationships, and they're moving on as young adults.
So when you got back to school, you were starting again in the year below what you would have been.
Yeah, that's right.
So you had to make new friends.
So the kids were a year. Yeah, I went to year 11.
Yeah.
They were all a year younger than me.
Yeah.
So I'd had the year off at Tarramurra, and it was. I only went back really with the intention to just party. I thought I'd miss out on the high school parties, and I certainly achieved that if that's what I wanted to do. And the kids were good. Like I made friends easy, and they all took me in, and no, they were. This was at Tarramurra. They were good kids. Yeah, this was the year 11 class of 1998. And I sort of fit into the fray pretty easily, and worked out who the smokers were, and I was hanging out with them every lunchtime and recess. And
Nice.
so I did year 11 and 12 at Tarramurra, and then I finished HSC. And in fact, I've looked back, I give credit to myself for getting through that.
Yeah, it's hard enough if you're not navigating all these transitions. But by the age of 16, you'd been through moving interstate, losing a parent, being through a life-changing accident. That's,
There's a bit going on,
Yeah.
there was a
A
little
lot
bit
going
going
on.
on. But then again, I tend to think as well, looking back, I tend to think that when you are that young, that's when you can roll with the punches a bit more.
Yeah.
Because you don't know anything else. And I just wonder if when you look at wars around the world and young men go off to fight, if a big part of what can really help get them into the headspace they got to be in is the fact that they are so young and they can just roll with the punches and they can take it, because
You don't think about consequences.
they don't know
so
what they
much.
stand to lose yet.
Yeah.
At that age. I just wonder if that's a big part of it, because for me, what helped me get through it was the fact I didn't know what I'd missed out on. I hadn't seen it. And I'm just sort of, when you're young, you're sort of impervious, you're indestructible.
Yeah.
I'm still in that mindset. So I think the naivety of youth got me through it.
Yeah.
I really do.
And how did the kids at South Tarramurra react to your accident? I read Tina Fey's biography a couple of years ago, and she has a scar on her face, and she says she can tell so much about a person by the way that they approach her about her scar. Some people will talk to her straight away and be like, "Oh, how did that happen?" Others will kind of wait a few months of knowing her, and other people will never bring it up. So do you have an experience like that? How do you...
No, that's interesting. I always thought that the number was around 15% who feel uncomfortable or awkward to approach you, and they can't look you in the eye, and they shy away, and they can't talk to you. For me, I found like 85% of people are totally fine. They just treat you like another person.
Yeah.
But for me, it was around the 15% that sort of really did struggle with it. But
And does your dark sense of humour ever want to?
I wanted to get a tattoo. I wanted to get a tattoo once that said "Death to 15%." That's how badly I took it. I'm glad I didn't do that one drunken night in Bali. Yeah,
Because you do, when you go through something like that, you just want recognition. And so many people experience it through grief of losing a loved one, where you just want people to acknowledge what's happened to you.
Yeah.
And it can be quite isolating when people just pretend nothing's happened.
Well, and for me, because I was always the sort of kid that wanted to be friends with everyone.
Yeah.
I wanted everyone to like me. You know, it took me a long time to realise that you can't have everyone liking you. There are some people that just will never like you. But I wanted to be friends with everyone. So for people to sort of exclude me or shut me out, because, you know, the fact of what I've been through, it made me try and fight for their friendship even harder, which made them push me away even further. It made them hate me even more.
Yeah.
There are some people you just got to cut the cord and say, move on, find someone that, you know, will look you in the eye and say hello. That's another thing I'd tell my younger self is don't worry about the 15%, just cut them.
Yeah.
Cut them, they're dead, Just let them go. You know, just focus on the 85%. And again...
That's a huge percentage.
Yeah, glass is half full. Here I am worrying about the 15% that won't look me in the eye when I should be focusing on the 85% that do.
Yeah.
So, again, that's the lesson to learn out of that. But I remember, here's a story for you. I remember soon into my recovery at Royal North Shore, I was working with a hand physio, and Julia, her name was, and she's, you know, passionate about her job and fascinated by all things to do with, you know, hand physiotherapy. So this case that I presented for her was one right out of the box. You know, a bloke who's had a hand transplant, 15 years old. And she was blown away. She was intrigued and fascinated by it as she was blown away by it. And I suspect felt quite honoured to be the physio working on me. But she was beautiful. She was lovely. And the thing I loved about Julia was she called a spade a spade.
Yeah.
She'd just look you straight in the eye. And I'll never forget, you know, on within the first couple of sessions I did with her, she just looked me in the eye straight away and said, "Simon, you've got to accept now that you're disabled, and you're going to be for the rest of your life." And she said, "And people are going to treat you differently because of it." And she said, "It's not fair. It's not right that they'll do that, but they will, because that's just the way people are. You've got to get your head around that, you know." And I remember in my own mind challenging her. Saying, "No, but this hasn't changed who I am. I'm still the same person inside. It won't change. You watch, I'll prove you wrong." But nearly 30 years later, I can tell you, if Julia's out there, she hears this podcast, Julia, you were absolutely on the money.
Yeah.
Absolutely on the money.
It's so true. I shaved my head a few years ago, and I have very long hair. And I was expecting to feel this inner transformation, but it's just a haircut. Nothing changes. You feel exactly the same, but everyone treats you differently just because of what you look like or what might be different about you. Yeah, it was just something I wasn't expecting.
No, well, it's an image-conscious society that we live in.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, you've only got to wander through the Corso at Manly to realise that. You know, I mean, everyone's totally absorbed with how they look and how the world perceives them.
Yeah.
That's the world we live in. A lot of that is, you know, drummed into us from television and the shows that people watch, and that is the society we live in. You know, it's is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. I don't know, but at the end of the day, you've got to fit inside it somehow because it ain't going to change for you.
Yeah. So it sounds like you had some great support from Julia, your hand physio.
Yeah, she was. She was excellent. Yeah.
But did you have any other support? Was there any compensation offered?
No, there's certainly no compo, and not really money. There was no NDIS back then. There was no financial support. But as I said, you know, we didn't pay for the operation, but anything to do with follow-up services with, you know, counsellors or even the at-home nurses that come around, change dressings, that sort of thing. Any of that was, you pay for that out of your own pocket. So, no compensation, and certainly nothing to do with an NDIS scheme where things would be paid for. I'm on that now, thankfully. Years later, that's been good for me. But no, for me, in fact, I even had a prosthetic arm at one point, and I don't remember paying for that either.
Yeah.
Just turned up and the bloke strapped it on me and I walked out the door.
What was that like?
Oh, it was this archaic device. It was,
Yeah.
It was like something out of Blackadder. I mean, it was totally. It was. It was a draconian type thing that had metal, wires and cords and buckles
Yeah.
and braces and all things around it. And I wound up having too many drinks one night and losing that as well.
Okay.
But someone found it hanging off a branch of a tree in Asquith Park 3 weeks later with a bong clenched in its hand.
No way.
And it wound up on Triple M as like a funny phone call. And my mate rang me. He goes, "Hey, they're talking about your arm on Triple M. Ring them up and claim it back." And I said, no way, I'm too embarrassed.
Yeah.
I said, "I prefer it without it. Thank you very much." And I'm glad that I didn't have to wear it again because it was too uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it was more disabling than
Well,
enabling.
it was, and it was there just more to try and look the part. Like, you've got another arm, and it was just I was much more comfortable without it.
Yeah.
So I did away with the prosthetic, but didn't pay for that. So no, I just sort of stammered on through life
Yeah.
as best I could.
Yep. So you finished high school at South Turramurra, and then what did you end up doing after high school?
Well, my dad was sort of at his wit's end with me, and I sort of moved back in with him, and he'd remarried by that stage, so my stepmother suggested that I should probably go out to Parramatta. That could be a good place for me, and it proved a masterstroke. It absolutely proved a masterstroke because it set up what I've been doing for 20 years. But I moved out there not really knowing much about what I was going to do for my future.
Yeah.
My dad was paying rent for me on a little one-bedroom flat because I was on a disability pension. I couldn't have done it myself. And then I very quickly sort of got into the groove of welfare life out there. So I was going to the soup kitchens.
Yeah.
I was going to the barbecues in the park. I got to know who the street element were. There was a lot of drinking. There was a lot of drug taking. It was that world,
Yeah.
And I fell into that world, the undercurrent of that world.
Okay.
And it's funny how years later, with some of the volunteer work I've been doing now, I've sort of come back through the other side
Yeah.
to get back into soup kitchens and charities and all of that. But I've turned the tables on it and have gone from someone who used it to access the
Right.
services to now sort of provide support on the other side. But basically, I was a disabled pensioner at the age of 20
Yeah.
with no prospect of a future, knocking around with like-minded people on the street.
Yeah.
And it was. I'm glad I did it because it gave me some really good life experience, and you meet some fascinating characters.
Yeah.
You're really fascinating characters. And some of them now I look back, I just laugh at, some of the things that they used to get up to. But the silver lining out of all of this, is that 2KY, a racing radio station, was on the same street I lived in, and I was on Argyle Street at Parramatta. They broadcast all the horse racing and sport. And my friends always said, you got a good voice for radio,
Yeah.
you should. And I used to like out of the TOB and punting on the horses. That's where we spent our idle time.
Yeah.
So I'd always be down at the tab, filling out a ticket, putting my last 50 cents on a Quinella or something, and not realising that what I'm listening to through the speakers would one day become my vocation. And as it came to be, I met someone that knew someone at the radio station.
Wow.
And I went in there and I got to meet them, and I started to practice 3 or 4 nights a week just in the spare studio.
Yeah.
Doing the role that I do now, which is a race coordinator, which is putting all the races to air on the AM channel, 10:17 AM,
Yeah.
for 2KY as it was then, now Sky Sports Radio. And it was about 12 months later that I gave a demo tape to the boss and I got my first paid gig out of it.
Wow.
And that's the job I've been doing for 21 years.
Wow. So you got into it just by knowing someone who knew someone
Yeah,
who knew someone.
and before long I knew all 3 of them.
Yeah.
So that's exactly how it works, and especially in the world of media. I mean, it's all
Yeah.
about who you know.
And how did you find that transition?
It was amazing, and it gave me some. It really did give me a sense of peace, and it gave me a bit of pride as well, because I'd lost a lot of pride. I thought
Yeah.
it's just my future, knocking around on the street with these blokes, going to the soup kitchen, always been broke. Really, is this where it's at for me? And I knew I was better than that. So it gave me a real sense of self-accomplishment, and I could sort of get back to the level that I was at.
Yeah.
And I had some really good mentors, very good people that were now influencing me. And the old saying that you can't soar like an eagle when you're hanging around with turkeys, it was
Yeah.
just like that. So I then went into radio and got into a sort of a new group, had new friends, and got a part of the horse racing scene really quickly. And I'm just so grateful and indebted to not only the people and the bosses that have given me my jobs over the years, but just the industry as a whole. The horse racing industry as a whole. It's given me a livelihood. I believe it saved my life. I really do believe it saved my life. Yeah.
Not a lot of people can say that about their career.
No. I'll make sure that the bosses at the ATC hear this actually. They'll be very happy with it.
So how did the turkeys, as you call them, respond to you getting this great job and moving out of that circle?
But you know what? They were really happy for me.
Great.
They were. I mean, they were really happy for me. I remember Crackers raised a long neck to me on the river one day as I was walking to work.
Nice.
But they were. And it's funny, you'd almost think that, they don't want to lose a drinking buddy. But no, they were really, really pleased for me. And I remember when I moved to Melbourne, I got 3 years after starting at Parramatta, things changed with our dynamic within the station.
Yeah.
And our part of the operation moved to Melbourne, and I got a full-time job out of it. So that was when I went to the next stage. Mm-hmm. And I was in Melbourne broadcasting back into New South Wales, and I remember I got a text message from one of my old mates, and he said, "Mate, I just walked into the Parramatta tab and could hear you coming through the speakers." He goes, "Admit it, bro, you've made it as a pro, I'm really proud of you." And that meant a lot to me, and it just goes to show that most people, regardless of where they are in their own situation, they want the best for someone else, and they're happy for you.
Yeah.
They were.
Yeah.
They were genuinely happy for me. So, yeah, that was the job that I've done for a long time. But, through all of this, and while, it all sounds good and it's been great, I have carried my own mental health struggles.
Yeah.
Because of the accident, struggles with depression. And when I sort of got to late 20s, so about 13 years after the accident took place.
Yeah.
That was when the PTSD hit.
Okay.
Really, really chronic PTSD.
Were you down in Melbourne at that stage?
Yeah, the PTSD would have sort of hit me then, I reckon. And then I moved back to Sydney after 7 years down there. So I was about 32, I think, 33 when I came back to Sydney.
And was that a bit of a shock and a surprise? Because you said you're a roll with the punches kind of guy. Did you think, I've sailed through this, I'll be fine? Or did you kind of know that everything was going to catch up with you?
Now, that's a good... You ask good questions, Margaret. I do. You ask me very good questions. I guess I didn't really know exactly what was ahead, but for me, I realised as I've lived longer, it became more apparent what I'd lost. Mm. And that's what it was. It was a deep sadness and grief for what I'd lost in life and what I missed out on, and not being able to be a part of these activities and watching your friends go off and do these things and feeling like you're excluded from it. So that was where the depression came from, I believe. It came from loss.
Yeah.
And then the PTSD was where I kind of felt like in my mind, and it affected my dreams. Like, I reckon 90% of my dreams were to do with that point in history in 1996 leading up to the accident. And I could hear the sorts of whistles that the birds were making in the trees around that time.
Wow.
The weather patterns, the time it gets dark. In May it gets dark early, it's stormy in Sydney. And if those weather patterns are mimicked again, it takes me right back to that point in history.
Yeah.
Because for me, that was the point where it just all went wrong or it all changed.
Yeah. And at what point after you started feeling that did you think, I've got to do something about this?
Well, I mean, I always tried. I've always struggled with suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
And, I will put a trigger warning in here, but for a long time, I always thought that was going to have to be my last resort and my option. I thought if I can't get through this, if things don't get better, then that's the avenue I'm going to have to take. But I always wanted to help myself. It's not like I excluded it. So
yeah.
I went to psychologists, I went to therapists, and for me it simply doesn't come when you get 6 sessions for the price of 5.
Yeah.
For me, honestly, it's taken years.
Yeah.
I've got a really good psychologist now that I've been with for 10 years, and I still say to her, I didn't even start to get benefits until the 5-year mark of seeing her every fortnight.
Yeah.
It took 5 years for something to shift, and slowly that's been working. I've got a really good counsellor at Lifeline at Balgowlah, Jane D'Artagnan. I used to be a part of the men's group she ran down there. And she, again, I say it just took so long for something to shift, but just continued support and continued talking to her. Something shifted there. So it was like I had a team around me.
Yeah.
You know, and it was just persistence for me. I think because there was so much trauma down there, it just took a long time to get to it.
Yeah.
But now I feel like I'm coming through the other side and can start to do some good and turn the tables on it.
Yeah. So you mentioned Jane. Is it through her that you got into different community work?
Yeah, well, what had happened is last year at work in radio, I'd had a bit of a break. You wouldn't so much call it a nervous breakdown. I'd prefer to call it an eruption of honesty.
Yeah.
I blew my stack one day in the studio, basically. But what I did do was I made a comment about self-harm.
Yeah.
I made a comment about suicide. And because I talk about it often, I forget how confronting it is for others.
Yeah.
And some people freak out, you know, and there was two people in the studio, and one guy knew me well, and he sort of said, you'll be right, mate. He gave you a pat on the back. The other bloke just totally went white in the face and ran out the door screaming, fire, police, ambulance. He didn't know what to do, you know. So he's kind of made a comment to someone at management, has got shot up the chain to HR, and before you know it, they're all ringing, and you're okay. And then my boss said, look, maybe take some long service leave. It could be the right time for it. And I thought, yeah, the time's right after 20 years to do that.
Was that your initial reaction? Or were you looking at this guy thinking, calm down?
Yeah, my original reaction was, don't make a song and dance about it.
Yeah.
I'll be right. I'll get through this shift. I'll go to the club and watch your footy and have a beer and everything will be sweet. Wake up tomorrow and do it all again.
Yeah.
That was my initial reaction. But looking back at it now, nearly a year later, I think he did the right thing, and I'm glad he did because as they say, it wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. I needed the breakthrough. But as it happened, I was not in a good way mentally because I was worried about my job, about losing my income. I've got all this stuff going on, and I was suicidal. I was right there. So I was talking to Jane from Lifeline.
Yeah.
And she said, look, go down to Manly, go down to the drop-in down there. It's called Local Kind. We're a volunteer now. And talk to, there's a group down there called Roses in the Ocean, who are a suicide prevention organisation, non-profit organisation. And there's a lady down there, Kerry Gleeson, who I work with now. I consider her a friend. I went and met her.
Yeah.
And then went into a room and just told her everything that had been going on and everything that had happened with work. And I wasn't really in a very good state. And then as we're going on, she sort of says, you know what I hear here, Simon? I just hear someone that's got such good lived experience. That's what we do with our organisation. We like people with lived experience to walk with others and to try and help in any way they can. And having come from a father who's a teacher and a headmaster, there's always a part of me that's wanted to be a mentor and teach and bring what I've learned over the years to the table, because I dead set reckon I got some good points I could bring up. So I said, okay, well, why don't I come on board and do all the training and do the modules and the workshops and everything. I've got time off work now, so no excuse not to. So I did. That's what I did. I signed up and I came on board as what they call a peer care companion.
Yeah.
So anybody who experiences suicidal distress, anyone who might be bereaved by suicide, or anyone who is, walking with someone that has their own problems, they just need someone to come and talk to. They come to us and you meet all sorts of people and you have a chat.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been doing down there. So
Was that quite intimidating, or did you take to it like a duck to water?
No, it kind of felt natural.
Yeah.
Like it felt like it's where I needed to go.
Yeah.
I was excited about doing it. And I thought this is a big part of, I think, why I had my blow up at work was that it was just Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
And it was the same old thing. It was the same old rut, same old problems you're dealing with every day. And I just needed a change of energy. That's what it was. So this was a totally different, energy that I'd been able to bring into my life with new faces, new people, new stories. And I've always been a people's person.
Yeah.
So, no, I wasn't really daunted. I was really looking forward to it. And when I got into it and I got all my certificates and accreditations and whatever, and I was good to go as a volunteer, I was good enough I was lucky enough, and the team were good enough down at Local Kind to bring me through the door and say, come on board and do a couple of hours volunteering each week.
Yeah.
And since then, there's been no looking back. I'm so grateful to Craig Stevens that runs it down there and his team, and they are a tight-knit, dedicated team of professionals that really, them, Margaret. I don't need to tell
I
you.
do know them.
You do
Yes.
know them. You work with them too. So I just feel so privileged to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Really privileged to be a part of it. And 21 years ago when I'm at the soup kitchen at Parramatta, my knockabout mates up there, now to be on the other side of the counter helping people come through the door, it's kind of feels like I've gone full circle type thing,
Definitely.
Like I'm making that rotation.
So you work with Roses in the Ocean, Local Kind, and Moana as well.
Yeah, Moana's another one that on one of my workshops, I met a lot of the guys that work in the safe space at the Mine Cafe, 1356 Pittwater Road in Narrabeen.
Yeah.
That guy runs. But across the weekend on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 5 p.m. till 9 p.m, they have what they call a safe space, where it's a drop-in centre, effectively, if you got some problems on your mind, or if you're feeling anxious, or if you're a young person that's been bullied, or you're having problems at home, you drop in there and it's a non-judgmental space where you can sit down and chat and have a coffee and play board games or whatever and just chill out.
Yeah.
So I came on board as a volunteer up there and I've loved it. It's been amazing. It's Moana, Mowana, the first two initials from Mona Vale, Borriewood, Narrabeen.
Okay.
That's the name. That's where it came, because it's that area of the Northern Beaches.
Yeah.
So, there's a famous Melbourne Cup winner that was named in a similar fashion too. But
yes.
That's a different story. but I feel very, very privileged to work with Mel Kipri and her team up there.
Yeah.
I always say to Mel, you're a soldier for the cause, The hardest part is matching her passion. That's the hardest part, because she's just a force of fury with it all, and it could be very hard to match 24/7. We all need our downtime as well, but I take my hat off to her, because they are totally dedicated up there and they do a wonderful job. So I'm
there are
blessed to
so
be a
many
part of
great
that.
organisations on the Northern Beaches, but how do you juggle volunteer work, community work, and your career?
Well, luckily with radio, the hours have always been good. So I do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday nights on air. We're up at French's Forest, up near the hospital there. And then Monday, Wednesdays, I do my volunteer work down at Local Kind.
Yeah.
Wednesdays is Oz Harvest Day. It's a busy day when everyone gets the fresh food that comes out. And then I do like a Friday night or whatever up at Moana, up at Narrabeen. And occasionally, if I can, I like going to the soup kitchen on a Monday night at St Matt's. That's a really good service they run down there. And the reopening of the Salvation Army was on the other day that Diana and Malcolm run, that they do the soup kitchen down at St Matt's on a Sunday night, so I've gotten to know them as well. So it's one of these things there, once you get into the groove of it, you meet more people.
Yeah.
And, you get into the system, you figure it out, you see the faces, and you learn what all the services are. But what a great community and part of Sydney to be able to put back into.
Yeah, it sounds like you've made a lot of connections through this kind of work, and just for you putting yourself out there, it's not easy to do.
No, I think that's the lesson out of it. In fact, before we sat down to record this podcast today, I was with my psychologist.
Yeah.
As I said, I've been with her for 10 years, and I was talking to her about, doing this podcast and everything. And I said it's just all about, the connections with people on the community. And when you give something a go, then things come from it. You've just got to say yes. You've got to.
Fortune favours the bold.
Well, it does. And even now, doing this podcast with you right now came about from last year when we did that training day together.
Yeah.
The money-minded training day. It was a financially based training day. And I was all thinking, should I go? Well, it's not really for me. I was 50-50 with it.
Yeah.
But I said, no, look, give it a go. You never know. So I gave myself a bit of a kickstart that day, and it took a bit of energy to go down there. But that was when we discussed the podcast coming up early this year, and here we are now. So we wouldn't be doing this right now had I not gone to that workshop back in November or whatever it was. So again, it's just, like Paul Kelly says, from little things, big things grow. You've just got to say yes to things.
Yeah.
And then if you lay the good habits and the small atomic habits and the foundation of those, then good things will build up over time. But you've just got to get the small stuff right.
Yeah.
The day-to-day small stuff. So
it sounds like you're living proof of that.
Yeah, I'm in a good space now, Margaret. Yeah, I am. I don't even think we'll need the lifeline number at the end of this. I think I'm going that well. Yeah. I really feel like I'm in the best mental space I've been in my whole adult life.
Yeah.
So it's taken a long time to get here.
That's great to hear.
But certainly now I feel like I'm at the point where I can be more of a teacher now and a mentor, and I can help others. And it is the most rewarding feeling when you can bring something to the table that helps another person, when you can see it, just a smile on their face, when you can see from when they come through the door and they're not in a good way, And then when they leave, they've got a smile on their face and they're having a chuckle with you. It's a really uplifting feeling, it is. It's a great feeling.
Yeah.
And it gives you a real sense of purpose. So I want to do more and more of it. And I could only say to anyone who's listening to our podcast now, who's struggling or feeling like they're isolated or they're shut away, come down to Local Kind, come and see us, with our organisation, Roses in the Ocean, or any of the other organisations that work down there. There's more than a dozen down there under the one roof. Come up to Moana, come on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday night up at the Mine Cafe.
Yeah.
Drop in, say good day. Just reach out, because everyone's friendly and everyone's welcoming, and it's the safest space you'll be in. No one's going to judge you. This is the safest space to be in. And
Yeah,
you just
everyone's
never know.
been through it.
Yeah, you'll never know where it might take you. It might just be the little spark you need.
Yep. Great message.
Yeah. So, no, life's going well, Margaret. It is.
Good to hear.
It's good. So I feel like I'm in a good space now, and I'll just keep this going now until the next chapter of my life. I turn over to whenever that may be. I'm 44 now, so I'm kind of hoping that on the other side of 50, maybe I'll be doing more of this more full time. I don't know, but I certainly feel well placed for my future now. So I don't have too many anxieties or concerns about it.
Great. So I just have one more question for you before we wrap things up. So you're someone who's been through so many transitions. How is it that you find belonging?
Oh, for me, belonging, I would relate that to connection. I would have to. And to find a spot here in this community on the Northern Beaches, and I'll say I've been here for 10 years. I've lived in lots of different places outside of that. And this is by far the best place I've ever lived. It's my favourite place for sure. I think for me it's been in the community at the ground level. It's going to the soup kitchen on a Monday night, going up to Bible study afterwards with the gang, seeing the guys down at the drop-in centre, going for a walk on the beach, having a coffee, helping someone with their food for the week. That is what fills me with a sense of belonging to a community, because I feel like a worthwhile member and an active contributor. And what I'm bringing to the table is enriching and helping the lives of others, and always trying to do it with a laugh along the way. Like, you know me, I don't take things too seriously. Yeah. I like to have a laugh and a bit of a joke and just keep people smiling. So if I can continue to keep someone smiling and having a laugh and helping them on their day with what they need, then I've done my job, and that's what fills me with a real sense of belonging to this community, and long may it continue.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Simon. It's been great to hear your stories and for you to share things with us.
It's been fantastic. I feel privileged and honoured to be a part of it. I think you've got a real future in this podcasting, Kate and Margaret. You're very good at it, so thanks for having me on board.
Thank you. And listeners, if you want to find Simon, you can find him at Local Kind on Mondays and Wednesdays, down at the Mine Cafe on Friday evenings, or on Sky Sports Radio.
10:17 a.m.
There you go. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Everyone has a story to share. The next time you see someone you don't know in your neighborhood, be curious, say hello. And you may be surprised to hear the story they have to tell. We hope you have enjoyed this podcast. Leave a review, listen to another episode, or contact us to share your story.